To Open Dialogue. In this part of the program, we're going to be dealing with how mosques can create their own destiny, create futures which are independent of British political, religious engineering, social engineering of Muslim communities, how we can make mosques and centres which communicate and connect with our neighbours much better. We're going to also look at the efforts that are being made to do that, and we're going to also perhaps examine some of our own naive Muslim leaderships and organisations which are actually harbouring, if you like, Trojan horse projects which are getting into our centres to basically say they're doing the same things, interfaithing and other things, yet actually might really genuinely be causing a detrimental effect to our relations with wider society. With me in the studio, I have Sayyid Waqar Hussain Shah continuing the dialogue that we've had, and also Molana Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi. Welcome, both of you gentlemen.
Thank you.
But after this video, we're going to commence with our own diagnosis.
Tea and cake, a very British tradition at your local mosque. The East London Mosque is one of dozens of mosques across the country taking part in Visit My Mosque Day, a national initiative inviting the general public to come in, look around, ask their questions and find out what really goes on inside one of Britain's mosques. For 23-year-old Horatio, it's the first time he's ever stepped foot in a mosque.
One of the big problems, I think, that we face in a society is that religions like Islam can look a bit foreign to British people like myself because we just haven't been in. So there's, for example, there's the rule that you need to take your shoes off before you can walk in. That can isolate some people when you feel a bit alienated and you feel that it's so different you don't really want to come in. But after you come in, you realise that it's just an ordinary building. Its importance is with the people within it, who are all very nice. We met them now and been told all about the religion, and now I feel comfortable with the building, with mosques, and I'll come again.
There are about 3 million Muslims in the UK and about 1,600 mosques. But while surveys show Muslims actually feel more British than their fellow citizens, questions about how Islam is compatible with British values and the consequent tensions in society still remain. The rise of far-right anti-Islam groups on the one hand and extremist attacks like those in Paris on the other have fuelled these sentiments.
Because of the recent events, etc., it was important to actually show that to the public, that the mosques are places of worship, they are places of a community hub. That's what happens here, and there's nothing mystique or mystery about it. And that if people understand and see for themselves, then they will understand and appreciate it.
It's an open-door policy that hopes to make it clear that there is nothing to hide, but in fact a lot to share inside Britain's mosques today.
So fascinating that the MCB, one of the organisations out there which does prominent work, backs this kind of visiting mosques occasion. Nothing wrong with it, great, and I think it's great to have that transparency. But other things that these kinds of organisations are guilty of, arguably, is that they're actually rolling over to the pressure by political forces, again, the state, the government, think tanks, who've all bludgeoned them over the last 15, 20 years to start accepting a reformist liberalism within our mosques. That's definitely gathering pace. They're not telling you to have female imams yet. They're not necessarily telling you to have gay imams leading your prayers yet. They're not forcing you to necessarily, have love-ins with Israeli, if you like, ministers and their strategists or whatever. They're not doing any of these things overtly. But what they have done is they've got organisations which were being formally critical of British government foreign policy and British government policy here in terms of Prevent and other state legislation which is increasingly targeting Muslims as pariahs. They've got them becoming silent and actually quietly. I rather notice, for instance, MCB are running this Our Futures, Our Mosques campaign along with National Zakat Foundation. I would look very carefully at large national rollout programs that come into your centres, as managers and as community, what you need to ask is, what's the purpose of these? What's the long-term purpose? Not just the short-term purpose, but is there also a doorway that's being opened up? And are our organisations actually beginning to facilitate the narrative which Cameron started, and perhaps even as far back as Blair, which was to say that Islam in its conservative traditional format is not quite compatible with British values, and perhaps what we need to do is start liberalising it, but you can't do it overnight. So maybe you can start first of all by having a relationship with our top organisations and our leaders and bending their ear to say, look, hang on, if you don't listen to us, then at the end of the day we've got Charities Commission, we could always cause problems for you there. Or if you don't listen to us, perhaps we could start making life difficult with our extremism policies in your centres. Waqar, I'm going to come to you first, and without concentrating too much on the negative, but that was one positive thing, the idea of opening up mosques. But are we ready? Do we have any public relations skills, media skills, or understanding of our neighbours at that level where we would be able to introduce our mosques, our activities in a way which would really endear the public? Because a lot of our mosques and centres are not that great necessarily at public relations.
I think the answer again is no, we're not really prepared for that. You've got to remember that most of the centres, majority of the people who run the centres are lay people, volunteers, good-hearted people, but unfortunately they lack those qualities that you've just mentioned, and skills. And the centres, what you were talking about earlier, what do we offer and what can we offer? You know what we offer, the rituals and the good food and lots of other good things. I'm just joking. Education, very good. I mean, they're doing the utmost best. But what they need to be offering is politically aware people, such as yourself, perhaps, to come and give us a lecture every now and then.
Well, I'll never get invited to any of these mosques.
Invited
No,
to. There you go, first invite.
I'm happy to bring my narrative into those mosques, but they never invite me.
Well, we will invite you.
That's a complaint.
Taken. We need to invite people to come into a centre. I again, politely, with all due respect, criticise, but positive criticism, with our clergy. They need to, because they're the people who speak in public. We attend, they speak, we listen. And they are the people who should perhaps speak up a little bit more than they are doing at the moment about basically to be a bit more politically aware, to be a bit more aware of the social engineering that's going on, and the people who come to our centres, back doors and try to be your friend, and basically they're trying to make us conform to their narratives. And again, that word, that phrase, happy clappy Muslims, just be good Muslims, do your rituals and don't worry about the politics. We'll take care of that.
Well, the politics, let me hold on this again, because people are going to say, well, what's my centre got to do with the politics? Well, look, let me link it straight away. Because IMCD, the Initiative for Muslim Community Development, of which yourselves have been, if you like, active contributors and thinkers and activists, doers, has come up with a link. And the link is legislation, government legislation, and the link is community centres and our own spaces. Now, let me try and deconstruct this a little bit for you, and then for you to answer a question on it. Gender fluidity, relationship, sex education in schools has become something that Muslims have taken up now as a cause, and Dr. Kate Godfrey and others have been doing grand work on it.
Absolutely.
What if gender fluidity as a policy around equalities, because this is the legislation I'm going to talk about, the equalities legislation, which most Muslims know nothing about. What if that equalities legislation came to you as a centre manager and said, Waqar, in your repertoire, would you allow a gay imam to lead the prayers? And if not, you're in violation of the equalities laws. If they were to come to your centre and say, for instance, there's a transgender individual who's a man, who's now decided he's a woman, but he's still physically a man, but he wears a burqa nowadays and he wants to go into the ladies section in your centre. The Equalities Act will probably turn around to you and say your centre is totally compliant, has to be totally compliant with that. Those are just two practical cases of where equalities law and legislation in this country and the mood of the state and the mood of the policy planners is taking us. There's a direct collision with Muslim values of modesty, segregation, of men and women, which are clearly going to affect your centre. How do you deal with that? How are you going to deal with that?
Well, the first one, I think Molana Sahib can answer that, but I'll give you my view on it. It's that it's against Islamic law, and all due respect to those people who are that way inclined, gay, what have you, they cannot, by Islamic law, Sharia, they can't lead congregation, they can't give speeches. It's against our principles and it's against Islamic law if they're openly gay.
But the British law will say they can.
Well then, we'll see if that comes, but we'll have to oppose this. This is why we need to be politically woken up. You can't be
But where's the contingency for our centre managers and our leaders? Have they got a plan for this kind of thing?
I don't think they have, to be honest. We're looking at each other for guidance.
So Sheikh Shumali, Agha Milani, many of the great scholars that I know in our midst have no plan for this kind of equalities.
They might have something on the back burner, but they're not bringing it out in the open at the moment.
Fine. So we're going to put that question. Do you have a plan? Answers on a postcard, waiting for COEG, World Federation, Majlis Ulama Shia, Islamic Centre of England, all the well-known prominent leaders, plus the smaller centres, send us your plans. It'd be great to hear.
Now there is another Majlis.
Oh, Majlis Ulama Imamiyya. So are any of these going to be leading us on a political level so that we can deal with the legislation that's going to come to manage our centres? This is my question. Do we have a plan? Are we analysing this? Do we employ people who do this? The Khoja community is especially proud of how great they are at organising. Do you have a plan? Is there something you've got going in terms of equalities and how it's going to impact your centres and your spaces and public spaces? And what will you do when the collisions happen with your Islamic law? Will you concede to British government demands, or will you stand for the Islamic principles? Interesting one. Molana.
Yes, as far as the Islamic teachings are concerned, there are very clearly written and defined laws regarding leading the prayer. The person who leads the prayer, whether for male or female, for example, first of all, Islam does not restrict an imam to be lady, but she can lead the prayer for the ladies only. And if she is leading the prayer of a ladies' congregation, she shouldn't be practicing and believing in lesbianism. If she is a lesbian, she is not allowed to lead the prayer in the ladies. If an imam in the male is leading the prayer, if he is gay, he is not allowed to lead the prayer, because one of the qualities of a person who leads the prayer is to be not committing sin. And the person who commits sin cannot be adil and leading the prayer. So whether lesbian or gay, they are both committing sin according to Islamic teachings. So therefore they cannot be imam. And that's very clear. And we should not be afraid to express the way Catholics are not afraid to express their Sharia, and the way the Jews are not afraid to express their Sharia, we should also not be afraid to express our Sharia. And as far as the hudud and punishments are concerned, those are not practical in non-Muslim society. And we are actually not allowed to practice that part of the Sharia, because for that part of the Sharia you require an Islamic government, majority of Muslims, and an adil leadership. And if that is not there, then it's not possible.
Well, I've said over and over again, I think that people like Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi have a much braver voice. Perhaps we're selecting the wrong leaders, because if they're not willing to help us out and preempt these these things which are going to cause problems to our community, then they're not really leaders, are they? They're just people who are prayer leaders.
Silencing a speaker or removing someone from centers for the sake of a disagreement is not the solution.
Well, that's happened. That has happened, and we know it's happened. That we need leadership. We need the leadership of people who are willing to stand up for the rights and the values of Islam without saying, actually, no, we'll compromise with British law. British law has to recognise the rights of Muslims because it's a secular society. The purpose of secular society is to protect pluralism, and part of pluralism is the people of religion. When it comes to a collision between religious people and their rights and the rights of homosexuals, or the rights of, I don't know, black people, or the rights of white people, or the rights of, you know, Asian, brown people, whatever, or people of animal welfare lovers, or the rights of, you know, anybody else, where do we stand? Are Muslims lower down in that rights pegging? Are we going to lose out, Molana?
I would like to also add that Islamic ruling for leading the prayer is not only restricted to gay and against gay and lesbians. Anyone who backbites, anyone who cheats, anyone who lies, anyone who drinks alcohol, anyone who consumes drugs, anyone who hurts someone else, anyone who oppresses, is not fit and suitable to lead the prayer. It's not only gay and lesbians.
Somebody should employ Sayyid Razawi again and actually help him to guide our political response to government's attacks, which are increasing with the frequency and with the passing of time. We know your number. Establishment, well, as you watch my program, we're going to have to go for the equalities issue. That's going to come up more and more. We're going to deal with it. You better start talking to us. The Molanas better start talking to us, because we're going to start opening this up much more. And there's a lot of areas where you're very, very vulnerable.
We invite government officials to come and discuss.
Come to the program. We'd like to discuss
live.
We'd like to discuss equalities laws. We'd like to discuss prevent. We'd like to discuss your rules around integration that are coming up. I've sent letters out. I'll send them again. Some people, one officer has responded, but he says that the establishment probably won't let him appear. I'm sure there are some people who will appear. I'll keep writing. We'll keep asking. Caller online, could we have your comment or question?
It's me again.
Ahlebait, the whole world is sleeping except you. We're grateful that you're calling in. The rest of them are probably sitting there petrified, saying these guys are taking on state and government, but you're not. Do they have your number? Do you think MI5 has your number, perhaps?
Now, Mohsin, I don't know, is there a law to say you can walk into any organization and demand something that there is a leadership in every community? And if somebody is a gay or whatever, I mean, until unless the leader of that place doesn't allow him to do it, he cannot force himself into it. So I think the law cannot really interfere with that, because every mosque has a leadership. And if that leader says, okay, that's fine, you can lead the prayers or whatever, then I think that leadership knows of the laws of Islamic laws, and he'll definitely say, well, I can't allow you.
Well, Ahlebait, 10 years ago, if you'd asked me 10 years ago whether Muslim children would be picked up from their homes and separated from their parents by a group called Channel and part of a prevention of extremism exercise, the kids would be taken away from home for using the word cucumber or terraced house, I would have said to you that you were mad. And I would have said that the British law would never allow such things, and its practice and its implementation would never happen. It has happened. Muslim kids are being targeted. Doctors and nurses are spying on us. Probation officers, it is part of the government policy to keep an eye on us in that detail already. So there's no going back, that's happening. The Muslims haven't squeaked by and large because they're either ignorant of it or too scared. This is my issue, that we live in a democracy where we are scared of asking for our rights. The gays are scared of asking their rights. The transgender aren't scared of asking for their rights. The animal welfare people aren't scared of asking for their rights. The environmentalists aren't scared of asking for their rights. But Muslims have become scared of asking for their rights. So are we not equal citizens? That's my question in the minds of Muslims. Are you not equal citizens? Join us again. Please call back, as we've got a shortage of time. I've got one more video which I'd like to run, and then to create some positivity as well, because there are some positive videos I'd like to share with you. Studio, if you could give us our next video presentation, it would be very welcome. And I'm grateful to Molana for being straightforward.
The statistics make for uncomfortable reading. Over a 6-month period, hate crimes committed against Muslim places of worship showed a worrying spike, more than doubling from 47 to 110 across the country. As a highly visible minority, many Muslims would have greeted this new piece of alarming research with a sense of dread and, dare I say, some apprehension, because the faithful need not look too far back in their memories to recall a horrific Islamophobic murderous terror attack that took place just meters from where I stand, and that illustrate perfectly the level of hate and fear that can run through a community. Back in June this year, Darren Osborne used a van he'd hired to mow down worshippers leaving Ramadan night prayers, killing 51-year-old Makram Ali and injuring 9 others. Whilst most hate crimes include bomb threats, verbal and physical assault against worshippers and racist graffiti, the case in Birmingham less than a fortnight ago, when a 14-year-old boy was left fighting for his life after being stabbed in the neck, highlighted the more violent side of this hatred. Imran Shah is from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee.
This is nothing new. This is the general daily experience of the Muslim community, and whilst this is shocking in itself, the Muslim community at large will be saying, like, this is our story. We are never able to talk about this, and this is our daily experience. And headlines is not really going to cut it. We need some real change in policy, real change in culture and attitude, and if we don't see that, then we're going to see more headlines like this in the future.
Spikes in attacks coincide with high-profile terror attacks like that of Manchester and London Bridge. But this, says campaigners, is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Islamophobic attacks. Places of worship must also take a different approach.
We need masjids to not just be like, calm down, let's try and take this quietly and peacefully. We need them to make noise and actually get their story across. Yes, okay, security protocols like CCTV, gates and everything else, and liaison with the police is necessary, but it's the culture of Islamophobia that's actually causing these attacks. It's not anything else. And if we're not addressing that culture on a proactive level, whether through the media, whether through our community, whether through any sort of proactive action, then we're going to see more of the same.
Government policy alongside firm community action must find a common ground that will help to root out hate crimes in all its forms. Failure to do so will ensure these worrying figures are not the last.
It's a frustration felt by Muslims just about everywhere that the world only sees the worst in their faith and their people. But what good have Muslims done for the world? An exhibition spanning over 1,000 square meters at the prestigious Science Museum in London has at least part of the answer. According to historical data gathered by the 1001 Inventions Project, Muslims were the global pioneers of science and technology for over 1,000 years. While Europe was in the so-called Dark Ages, the fruits of Muslim inventions flourished and permeate almost every aspect of modern life today. It's a fact frequently left out of history lessons.
It shows a very different image to the men who are wearing turbans. You know, they're not terrorists. You know, these men wear turbans, were, you know, the prime scientists of their times. If not to them, so many things wouldn't have happened. You know, many of the inventions that are shown here at the Science Museum wouldn't have taken place if it wasn't to some of these people.
20,000 people came through these doors in the first fortnight. Senior management at the Science Museum have described it as a blockbuster, one of their most popular exhibits in recent years.
I think there's some rather fascinating stories and perspectives to look at and for people to come and look at. And we hope that people will come in, look, learn perhaps, and go away and think a bit about these sort of new areas of science that perhaps they weren't so aware of.
The exhibition offers an important contribution to an otherwise politicised debate about Muslims in Britain. That Muslims not only belong here, their heritage had a big part to play in what makes the Western world a success story.
Well, I thought I'd introduce something positive. You see, that's an indication of where centres perhaps should be. We need to show excellence within our centres and our mosques, and we need to sort of demonstrate the highest quality in order for others to be able to really engage with us. But the early part of the video actually demonstrated many of the issues of our community centres' paralysis in terms of dealing with the reality of our situation now. And I raised one or two issues before the video break, which were to do with LGBT, transgender issues, about how our public spaces are very vulnerable and open to violation based around this idea of British values and equality, and a debate that the government has kicked off around liberalisation. I believe there is a preferred Islam which that state and the neoconservatives have dreamed up. And people like Henry Jackson's Society and the Policy Exchange people like Quilliam as well, have all been promoting this already. It's already in the marketplace, and it's actually beginning to infect our own community leaders and our own organisations at the highest level. That's an allegation I'd like our community leaders to come forward and refute. This show is open for you. We've written to some of you as leaders already. We'd like to reiterate that you're welcome to this show. People from COEG, people from the Islamic Centre of England, the head of the Islamic Centre of England has been invited to this show. I've sent WhatsApp invitations. I do hope you'll take up this, not to be battered down, but to ask these really hard questions and see where you stand and where your leadership is going to take this community. Because if you don't speak up, Molana has spoken up, so people clearly realise that what Mohsin is saying is not just a load of nonsense. I'm seriously concerned, and I'm not doing it to score points or attack anybody. It's to say that these are policy issues which we need to address as community managers, as community centre leaders. The public is ignorant. They're sitting there waiting for you, the people in the turbans and in the amamas, the people they respect. They're waiting for you, the presidents of each one of these centres and these vast organisations with huge amounts of, well, they're waiting for your leadership on this. But I'm not seeing leadership. I'm seeing you cower. I'm seeing you comply to the British policies. I'm seeing you not ask the questions. If you don't ask the questions that are necessary, you will not get the answers that are required to safeguard our community from neoliberalization of Islam, from the Zionization of Muslims, from the penetration and infiltration of all the strategies for neoliberalization of the Islamic faith in this country, and your community will not even know about, and you know it. Because the smart ones amongst you do know, and this is where I'm really disappointed in you. Because you know my narratives, you know IMCD's narratives, you know we've stuck the flag in the ground to say we have solutions and answers. None of you have had the courtesy to pick up the phone and say something to me. I've sent letters out, and you're on my WhatsApp groups as well. But I'm really, really embarrassed, and I'm really, really disturbed that you as community centre managers and leaders haven't come back to our thinkers to say, at least let's engage in a dialogue and a discourse. I will write to you again, and inshallah we will get those conversations restarted, because we can't afford to be quiet and just listen to whatever government, a state, and Douglas Murray and the neoconservatives and neoliberals, whatever they say to it. Don't be colonialized Muslims. Yes, sir. No, sir. 3 bags full, sir. We have rights. We have equality in this country. Others are using those equality laws to undermine our religious rights. What are you doing about that? Get a backbone, stand up with us, and actually come out into the field instead of hiding under your blankets behind all those charity names and those big reputations. It's not good enough. I'm sorry, and we're not going to stop raising this issue. This show is your show. Come here and talk about it. Privately, come and talk about it with me. Come and talk about it with our organisation and our network. Ahlan wa sahlan. We're here to help you, but you haven't responded, and you're trying to ignore us. And therefore, we have to keep raising the issue to the public, because if the public doesn't wake up to this around LGBT, around relationship, sex education, around transgender issues, how they're going to affect our communities, then it's going to be a disaster for our next generation in terms of prophetic lifestyle. That's what this battle is about whether we're allowed to have a prophetic lifestyle in Britain in the future, or whether we're going to have that terminated slowly but surely. Waqar, do you want to come in on any of the points that I've raised?
mashallah, that was kind of a good speech there. And, very mashallah, emotional and very true. I think I've got my mic. Let's give us 1 second. Right.
Please, Bismillah.
To work it out, yeah. There we go. We're back on. Yeah. No, mashallah, you've said it all there. And I speak to all our respected management of all our centres. Mohsin Bhai has really thrown the gauntlet down. Yeah, please do come here and discuss, debate and answer questions. And it's not going to be a management centre bashing day. It will be, a positive result without question of doubt. We need our centres, basically, mine included, to be better, to serve the public. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And also to the clergy, most respected clergy. We look to you for your leadership. We look to you for guidance. And we look to you, unfortunately, we look to you for spiritual awareness. Our centres are ill. We are spiritually ill. We lack spiritual guidance. People are good, mashallah. The Shias are good people. They need guidance. And they need to adhere to the guidance that's laid down by the Ahlebait, alayhim salam. We need to wake up, basically.
Waqar, one more question before I come to Molana.
Yeah.
It's blatantly obvious. I know Molanas and ulama, Sunni and Shia, who are involved with promoting British Army in our mosques and our centres. It's another agenda. I raised one. Let me turn it another way. This is a government state agenda that they want to promote British Army in mosques and for us to validate the British Army's recruitment drive. Now, on the face of it, okay, fine, we're citizens, we're British citizens, but we're not obliged to join the army. If, for instance, let's say I, as a centre or as an individual, object morally to the way my state is using the British Army to kill kids in Yemen through their surveillance or intelligence services, or supplying them missiles produced by us to kill those children, Venezuelans or others, or anywhere, forget about it just being Muslims, anywhere in the world. If I object to the British Army being deployed in Afghanistan for years, if I object to the British Army being deployed in Syria or in Afghanistan, all the places, Iraq, all the places that have over the last 30, 40 years been part of the war on terror, apparently, if I object as a British citizen, that is my right. Now, the point is, why would Molanas from our community, why would community centres think that it's okay to promote an institution which is being employed to kill and maim children, men, women, civilians for the sake of economic interests? And why would I be scared to express that opinion as a British citizen in this country? Give me some clue about whether Islamic centres should be engaged in promoting British Army, for instance.
Well, the question is, should they? No, not at all. We had not so long ago, faith officer introducing posters about joining the police force for young Muslims for our centre. I don't disagree with that, because if you want to change a society, you've got to be part of that society. If you want a revolution, you've got to get your people, your children involved in local government and main government, where you can change policies. So if you want the police to change, enter the police force and do something about it. As regards to the army, it's the first I've heard of this, actually, to be honest. They haven't approached our centres, but if they asked me, I'd close the door in their face, and if that means I would be spoken to, then speak to me. Because we shouldn't promote something which Ahlebait al-Islam forbids us to do, and which is to promote oppression. It's quite clear and obvious that the British government are promoting the famine indirectly in Yemen, and the Americans especially are responsible for disasters all over the Muslim world. It's obvious. And Mr. Trump, he's the mouthpiece, isn't he? And he said it very clearly. So it's all out there. But promoting the army, it goes against our Islamic principles.
Thank you very much. We've sadly run out of time. Molana, the last word will go to you. I mean, we've gone to town in terms of community centres and made some practical links. What's your advice, your final bit of advice to Islamic centres and the way they operate for us today?
Well, this part of the program was supposed to be positive. So on positive mark, I would say that open door policy is very good. We have nothing to hide, and we should occasionally and regularly have open door policies in our mosques and centers. And I also believe that we don't need imam baras or mosque. We need schools. Especially after looking at what is being promoted in the mainstream schools, we need to have private schools, we need to have our schools, and our schools can be used in evening as a mosque and imam bara. So that's what we need to do.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Sadly, I won't be able to run my final videos, which was a positive piece on modern mosques and how they're being built. We'll come back to this topic and deal with that at a future date. But you really need to focus as leaders and as centre managers on your reality. This was the point of the programme, is that you cannot live in those centres and those communities now as if nothing is going on around you in the environment. You cannot be disconnected to the political system locally or nationally. It's your government, your system. Their policies will come and haunt you inside your centres. You need to be prepared for that. The experts exist, the Molanas exist who can give you that leadership. You need to ask your questions to your leaders, your centres, your managers around these practical issues of what will impact your community spaces and whether you will be able to continue practicing Islam in its prophetic traditional form in the present and the future, given the laws on integration, equalities, and all this other business that the government's up to around counter-terrorism are directly restricting much of what you consider to be normal within Islam and normative Islam, a topic that is going to run and run. Thank you, Brother Waqar, Hussain Shah, and thank you, Sayyid Muhammad Razawi.
Thank you.
Again, for joining me. Join us again for the next edition, same time next week.